You ever just get the feeling that when you step into a building, an area, or other place, that you aren't alone? Well, that's exactly the feeling I had when I entered the funeral home and morgue that my parents owned when I was younger. Of course, one would expect spiritual energy to reside within the walls of the old morgue, dating back to the early 1900s, a family business, and one of the oldest operating morgues here in the country for personal reasons. I won't be disclosing the name of the morgue, but I've multiple stories of this place that will terrify you. They sure terrified me. The funeral home morgue is everything you would expect it to be when walking in. Barely illuminated, but light enough that you can see each room. Red concrete walls, red carpeting on the ground, curtains, etc. It almost feels as though you're stepping into a vampire's mansion. You have the lobby area and desk where clients are greeted for the first time, the fridge and freezer where all the bodies are stored, the viewing area where recently departed loved ones are awaiting family to visit, and just an overwhelming feeling of spirits and ghosts haunting the entire building. Oftentimes, I'd find myself alone working for my parents from the ages of 18 to 21. Little things here and there, managing paperwork, applications, etc. So, I'd often find myself there at night, some nights completely alone. I'll never forget one night I was there. We had a new departed client arrive. The family in the day had just set up the finances in order to cover the expenses of the upcoming funeral, and we had to set up the viewing for those who wanted to see the man of the family, who unfortunately met his demise at such a young age, 43. Working at a funeral home, you get some hysterical people who have a difficulty coping with the loss. Many choose to express themselves differently. Some are tight-lipped and reserved, while others tend to be conversational and talk. The widow of the man who passed away was very candid about her husband, spoke about how great a man he was, how he served in the Marines, how close he was with his parents. She was just very adamant about speaking about her husband and his career. So anyway, after she had left, and the visitation for the family had ended, the husband was still set up in his casket. I went to the office area and closed the door, where just outside was the casket, or the viewing area was. So minding my own business, doing what I needed to do as far as paperwork is concerned, when I hear a loud knock on my door, I say, "What the heck was that?" Since I knew I was the only one there, I thought it was a little bizarre. I thought maybe my mom or dad had stopped by to check in on me, since they are the only ones who would have come by. I then started to feel a pressure on my shoulder out of nowhere, as if someone's hand was being placed on me, and was getting a migraine and pressure on my head. This was all of a sudden. I was completely fine before then. So anyway, I sort of ignored the knock at first because even though I knew I heard it, I thought I was just tired. So this time, I hear another knock at the door, and curiosity got the better of me. So I opened the office door and looked out. I see the casket from the distance, and the strange energy, as if a presence was there. I felt a burning desire to check to see the casket where the poor man was, so I go. I check the casket, and there it is, just lying there. Nothing. No surprise there. My back is to the office door, however, and when I finally turn around, I see a shadow for a brief moment's time, standing in a door frame. It ends up moving quickly to the right, and then just disappears. That's really got me. So I called up my parents, told them I'm going to close up, and leave. I believe that the shadow I saw was the man who was in the casket. Maybe he wanted to relay the message to the family that he was still around, and wouldn't leave. I guess that would be the explanation. So, another story I have belongs to my dad who works at the funeral morgue. This time, he was the one who was finishing up paperwork for a new family that came in. And he was alone, late into the night. For some reason, he just keeps hearing whispering coming from the freezer and storage area where all the bodies of the people are kept. It would be on and off, as if there was a conversation of a few words exchanged between the two people. But it was very eerie, because again, the whispers would come and go, but he'd hear them. He wanted to make sure that nobody somehow was hiding in the freezer storage area. So he walks in, says, "Hello, anybody here?" I kid you not. My dad said that someone or something answered back. He said he heard a loud yes that sounded so much like a human being. So he searched the entire building and couldn't find anyone else here. Remember, my dad was alone, wasn't expecting anybody, and yet this voice, heard clear as day, was there to greet my dad for a split second. Just pure insanity. When my dad told me this, I told him my story, because this happened shortly after my experience. Thankfully, my dad is a pretty open-minded person, so he didn't dismiss my experience, and neither did I with his. I remember having a strange dream about the funeral home morgue as well. What happened was, I was suddenly outside the morgue, but it was locked. When I finally was able to get to the door to the morgue was lit up by candles all around, and there was a Ouija board surrounded by candles in a circle. I freak out, and I'm like, what is going on here? Suddenly, a screech that sounded like a banshee erupted from the building, and an old-looking witch gypsy appears and flies straight into the building and disappears. I wake up, sweating, and absolutely traumatized. It wasn't a dream that made me feel good at all. I thought that maybe this place had some weird dark past that I wasn't aware of, since the building was built in the early 1900s, so maybe there was a dark history of bad people there, way before my family took over the business. Perhaps it was an old home where people used to live, before it became a funeral home morgue. We just aren't sure. Lastly, I remember going with my dad to ghost hunt and investigate, because I really wanted to uncover the secrets and mysteries of this place. What kind of dark entities, if there are at all, exist in this place? And if they did exist, would they be willing to provide us with clues and some answers as to what this place's history was? So my dad and I did some EVP recordings in hopes that we could capture some ghosts speaking about themselves or the place they lived. The only EVP that was captured was a man's voice saying "never bad" after we asked it into the EVP if there were spirits there who were trying to do any harm. That really put us at ease. Made me think that every spirit that was there was not harmful and no demons. Maybe the dream I had was my mind overthinking, but who really knows? Thank you for allowing me to share my experiences. I used to often take little drives around town in the middle of the night to clear my mind. I was young and had no clear direction in life, as I was genuinely confused about what I wanted to do with it. I feel like a lot of people go through these types of things in life, working a job that they don't necessarily hate just to get by, but not yet having a dream job to really appreciate, wishing for something a bit more, that kind of stuff. I was definitely not in the right headspace, but I digress. This story is about the time where I encountered something on the road late at night. To this day, I still can't put my finger on it, but it was very creepy and will stick with me for the rest of my life. So one night, I was aimlessly driving to clear my mind, sort of to get away from the pressures of life for a second, and decided to take a different route. I ended up lost in the middle of the night, traveling alongside the road. I kept driving for hours on this strange gravel road, in what seemed like the middle of nowhere, for miles, just a straight road that was going and going. The only source of light was coming from my headlights beaming forwards, until I ended up driving slowly past this old dilapidated church. It looked like it was abandoned. I then shined my headlights directly onto the church, and I see an old lady with a bewildered and stone-faced stare, just standing there. I mean, she looked very old, almost like she was near death. It was the oddest thing I'd ever seen in my life. The weirdest thing was, though, she even looked like a nun. I don't know if it was, however, because it was hard to tell 100%, but she was definitely wearing some sort of black dress or attire. She also looked very pale, even though it terrified me. I stopped and yelled from afar if she needed any help, just in case it may have been someone in distress. She didn't respond. I remember her starting to walk towards me, even though she was yards away. As she walked away from the church, I wasn't having any of that and drove off. Still have no idea what that was, but it had to be a ghost of some sort. No old nun lady would just be standing in front of an old abandoned church in the middle of nowhere. Just doesn't make sense. During the day, I decided to go seek this old abandoned church out. So I go, and I find it. This time, there was no lady there. I was curious, so I step inside the church. Nothing. Nobody there at all. No signs of squatters. It was just an empty church. I don't even know why any homeless or squatter would end up here anyway, seeing as there is nothing for miles, and the church itself is literally collapsing. I had another one of these moments where I swear I saw an old dog running directly in front of my car in the middle of the night, then just to vanish into the night. I had no idea where it went, or how it appeared in the first place. It wasn't the same road as the nun lady, but it was in the same area, I believe. Whatever is going on, I thoroughly believe that this road is haunted. This experience was in the morgue. I was getting a tour of the morgue. At the very end of the tour, when the ghost tour guide was trying to contact a young man, I stood at the very edge of the freezer, and my friend stood right next to me with her back to an empty hall that we all just came through. While the guide was trying to communicate, my friend whispered to me asking if he heard that. I turned to her and let her know that I only heard a child say something that I couldn't even make out. I then turned back around to listen to the guide. A few moments had only passed. My friend asked me again if I could hear that. I asked her what she had heard, and she stated she was hearing breathing in her ear right between us. I bent a little and tried to listen, but heard nothing, so I just shook my head and turned back around. She then told me to hold my breath so she could listen, and I did for about 20 seconds. After a few more moments had passed, she told me again, "You don't hear that." This time, the look on her face was of horror, and her eyes were teary. I then shook my head, then turned back to listen to the guide. Suddenly, it felt as if someone took both their hands and slowly expanded their fingertips widely on the back of my head. I turned around, but nothing was there. Plus, my head was against a freezer, so no one could have done that. I have wrote to you before about my other experiences, but I have one about a haunted house a friend of mine lived in a few years back. A bunch of us used to hang out there. He had a lot of bonfires over the summer. The first time I ever went there was a few months after he had moved in. I was dating his best friend, and he told me that he thought it was haunted. I in turn did not believe him at first. Then things happened. We were in the kitchen, and all of a sudden we heard something from the basement, like someone using a broomstick and hitting the ceiling from the basement. I laughed at first and asked who was down there. Then I saw the look on my friend's face. He was terrified. and suggested we go outdoors for a while. While we were outside, I asked what was going on. He said that was the ghost's way of letting him know he was annoyed, so he leaves the premises for a while. I still was skeptical until I looked up and could see into the front door, and standing there in his living room was this old guy who was somewhat glowing. I almost hightailed it out of there when they decided it was safe to go in. I told them I was leaving, and they insisted I go back in, so I did. I asked my friend if he ever seen this ghost. He said no. I described to him what it looked like, and he looked into the previous owners of the house. Well, it turns out there was a guy who died in the house who looked like the same man I described. I freaked out after that, as well as my friend. Things were going good at first. Like every time my friend came home from work, he would announce himself, and the guy would never bother anyone. There was always this room upstairs that every time you walked by it, you could feel a cold draft from the door, and it was locked. We never thought anything of it, till the man started to get mad. There were more parties going on out there because of summer. Well, the man seemed to not like the parties, and he started showing himself more to me and my friend. I knew he was getting mad, and things got bad when he started attacking my friend at night. He would wake up with slashes across his back. We checked into the history more and found out that the man was not friendly when he was alive, and worse when he was dead. It did not take long for my friend to move. The beatings were worse by the time he left. Although he never attacked me, I always felt threatened by him. I would wake up to him right in my face, and he would disappear when I would scream. I still think about the horrors that the man would do to everyone, and how my friend survived actually being attacked by a ghost. Sometimes, I still have dreams about this man and how he chases people out of his house. To this day, the house is still empty. In the late 1970s, I attended college in New York State around the Finger Lakes. The building I described was built in the 1890s. Since we were in the middle of the first oil crisis, students who remained on campus spent the short winter term in the old main dorm to conserve energy. As it happened, some friends and I were assigned a large empty room on the top floor. It was 4 floors up and 1 floor below the attic, and one end slanted along the roofline. The room had primarily been used for storage. The gloomy winter sun had a hard time shining through the one iced-up window facing the lake. Dark as it was, we cheerfully shoveled the desk one side and slept on the floor to give us more room. We were having a good time camping out, and weren't inclined to do much schoolwork until our papers were due. After 3 weeks or so, a winter storm was approaching, so we decided to stock up on necessities and have a little party just amongst ourselves. I'd like to say that we were all sober as judges and went to bed early after saying our prayers. However, it being the late 70s, we indulged in smoke and alcohol. We had the music stereo up loud, but the music couldn't completely cover the growing sound of the wind. Our window was frosted up and had a tree branch scratched at the glass. Every now and then, someone wondered whether we would be snowed in. Someone said we would at least be able to get down on the tree. Eventually, we turned in. Unsurprisingly, that night, I had a very spooky dream. A woman hovered over me and was trying to say something to me. God knows I tried to understand her, but her fluid outlines and vivid colors made me feel a little bit queasy. I woke up, certain she was still in the room. I saw nothing, just the shadow of the tree limbs swaying outside. Too much party, I thought, and went back to sleep. We were quiet the next morning. I supposed it was due to too much of a good thing the night before. The snowdrifts were impressive, as the wind had been so wicked. The sun was out, and the sky was clear, and the snow was pristine. It was so different than the storm that I felt up to sharing my spooky dream. It seems that two of the others had a strange dream as well. Since we all dreamed different things, I was certain nothing occult had happened. I was very relieved, since we still had 3 weeks to live in that room. Being a Florida girl, I was still curious about snow still, and wanted to have a look around. I dragged a willing soul with me, and we make a quick trek around the yard. Finally, I wanted to see about our tree. My companion was crying about the cold as she ran into my back. When she saw why I had stopped, she said, "Son of a crap." You may have guessed by now that there was no branch, no tree, no vegetation within 15 yards of our window, and nothing was 4 stories high. We dug in the snow a bit to see whether it had fallen. Nope. No trunk, no hidden limbs in the snow. We ran up to the room to look out and make certain we had the right window. When we heated off the frost with a hairdryer and we looked down and saw nothing but our tracks. Every one of us marched back down to try and find our tree. Nothing. We went back upstairs and talked a bit to get over our shock. We're all skittish, but I managed to sleep in the room, but with our mattresses shoved much closer together. After that, we never mentioned much. Why bother? There was no rational explanation. I'm just glad I wasn't the only witness. That would have been crazy making. Hi. I live in the United Kingdom. I've had a few ghostly experiences. My first when I was about 7 or 8, just after I had my dog passed away. He used to sit with me at the top of the stairs when I was younger, as if to protect me from falling down. He would let me be me till I made it all the way up or down. After he was gone, I used to sit on the same top stair, pining for my best friend. One evening, I watched as a cat walked from the dining room door, which was open through the living room door, which was shut. This wasn't the only time I met the cat. I always slept with the door shut to my bedroom, but felt a cat paw pat its way to getting comfortable on my bed. I also remember it purring as well. We did have a cat at the time, so I thought it was her. I reached down to stroke what I thought was my cat. Instead, there was a small indent in my mattress. When I turned the light on, there was nothing there. My door was still shut, and my cat wasn't in the room. During my teens a few times, I woke up to find my light on and television turned on. This stopped when I moved out of the family home when I went to college. I suppose more disturbingly is what has been happening to me for the last few years. And 3 different properties I've lived in, my bed was shaken. First couple of times it happened, I was really scared, but I've gotten used to it now and have accepted it. If I had the courage, I would ask it what it wants, but it has never hurt me, and I believe it is there just to let me know it's looking out for me. Whenever it has happened, it is usually when I have been upset. It happened after I broke up with my ex-girlfriend, for example. Thank you for listening. From what I've seen of your website so far, it has been brilliant. I'm really not a big believer in ghost stories, and usually believe that there's a reasonable explanation for just about any paranormal encounter. But there is one story that my brother-in-law tells that I think there may be more than just a ghost story. He and some friends were driving home from visiting a nearby town's hockey tournament or carnival. I don't recall which, and they saw an old man walking in the middle of the road in front of them. My brother-in-law honked his horn to get the old man to move, but he paid no attention and just continued to walk on the road. They continued towards the old man and continued to honk the horn, but he just went about his business and ignored them. My brother-in-law says that as he approached, almost close enough to strike him with the car, the old man seemed to rise up and glide right over the roof of his car. Needless to say, they were all pretty freaked out. They thought they might have struck him or something. They still weren't prepared to admit that it might have been something more than just a man walking, so they stopped and got out to search the roadside to see if they indeed struck him. But they searched all around the area and found nothing to indicate that anyone else had been there. They still get creeped out by this story when they tell it to this day, because they all swear that they saw the old man, and I know these people. They are the last people that would make up a half-cocked ghost story. At my church, when I was the age to be in the choir, my choir director was very religious, so of course, she believed in demons. She used to live in this old house that was built in the early 1900s. As the usual setting for a ghost story, it was a dark and stormy night. She was a single mom at the time and lived in the woods. Her kids were very young, so during the storm they got scared and came to sleep in bed with her. When they fell asleep, she went to the bathroom. While she was in the bathroom, she kept hearing strange noises. She rushed herself so she could get back to the bed with her kids. When she was going to her room, she walked past her broom closet. When she did, the air got cold and she felt a presence. That's when she looked into the closet as she went back to see what was going on in there, and she saw a face staring at her from the closet. She slammed the closet door, ran back to her room, and fell asleep. When she awoke the next morning, she had a huge slash on her back. It was more like scratches, but it looked deep and scary. Well, that's the story I have. I hope you enjoyed it. Hey Phantom, so I'm not going to waste your time any longer. Just remember to click the like button, please subscribe if you're new, and as always, share the video. I know a lot of YouTubers say this, but for small channels like me especially, it's really important to share the videos for the algorithm and all that. So guys, I love you so much. Let me know in the comment section below which stories you like the most, and with that, I love you guys, and I'll see you in the next video.